Friday the 13th, a novelization by Simon Hawke, guest starring the voices of Bonanza Jellybean as Alice and AlleyWay as Bill. Chapter 7. Brenda ran into the latrine, set her toilet articles on the shelf over the sink, and tore off her slicker. The rain showed no sign of letting up. It had tapered off slightly several times over the evening, but otherwise had kept coming down steadily and hard. The path between the cabins were turning into mud. She thought it might be nice if it rained all throughout the night and into tomorrow. Then they wouldn't be able to do any more work. She frowned. On the other hand, Steve Christie probably had a whole list of things made up for them to do indoors. Clean the kitchen, scour the floors, repaint the beds. If he ran out of ideas, he could always have them wallpaper the cabins. She wondered about him and Alice. There was something going on between the two of them, but there was also a visible tension. She had only known Steve and Alice for a day, and what with Steve running around so much, she had gotten to know Alice a bit better. But even on such short acquaintance, she couldn't quite manage to put the two of them together. Alice was so much more laid back than Steve, so much more easygoing, and it was obvious that Steve's intensity was getting on her nerves. If Stephen didn't watch out, Alice might decide to trade him in for Bill. She knew Bill was attracted to her and thought Alice had definitely been encouraging him. She was kind of sorry the game had been broken up, but then it would have been much better if Bill hadn't been the only guy there. She had sort of hoped that Nettie would come back and join in, but he must have gone to bed early. She wondered where Jack and Marcy had gone. If Ned had crashed back at their cabin, she didn't think that they would have gone there. Maybe they'd grabbed a couple sleeping bags and gone out to the empty campers' cabins. Everyone had paired off for the night, she thought wistfully. Steve away in town, leaving Alice alone with Bill. Wonder if anything was going to happen there. Jack and Marcy off somewhere by themselves, and here she was alone. She wondered if she should go look for Nettie. She was tempted, but at the same time, she didn't want to seem too anxious. He was cute, but she didn't want to scare him off. He seemed like a nice enough guy. Nice guys were few and far between. Put a rein on it, girl, she told herself. Take it slow. You've got all summer. She brushed her teeth, completely unaware that Marcy's body was growing colder and more rigid not 10 feet away, an axe embedded in her skull. And neither Jack nor Nettie had all summer anymore. They had both run out of time. As she finished washing up, she didn't have a clue that half the counselors in the camp had died that night. She rinsed her mouth, threw her toothbrush and toothpaste tube back into her case, pulled on her slicker, and went out the door just as one of the shower curtains behind her was slowly pushed aside. She walked quickly back to her cabin, lighting the way with her flashlight. Her gaze so intent on the muddy path that she didn't see the latrine door open again. The sound of the rain and wind and thunder and her own footsteps squishing in the mud drowned out the sounds of her pursuer. The cabin was empty. She smiled. Marcy was obviously out for the night. She glanced out the window and saw that the light in the main cabin was still on. Don't stay awake too long, Steve, she thought. She struck a match and lit the candle on the nightstand, then turned off the cabin light. At least the generator was still working. She shed her clothes and put on her flannel nightgown. She picked up the candle and set it down carefully on the window ledge above the bed, then snuggled down between the covers with the book. A quiet, rainy night in a cabin in the woods, she thought. A perfect setting for a horror story. She picked up a paperback she had bought. The book was about vampires on a Mississippi riverboat. Just the thing for a night like this. She thought it would make a terrific film and wondered if Nettie was into horror movies himself. Outside, over the sound of the wind and rain and storm, a small voice cried out, "Help me!" For a second, Brenda wasn't sure that she'd heard it. She put down the book and listened. There it was again. "Help me!" It sounded like a child. She got out of bed and glanced out the window. It was impossible to see a thing. What the hell was a little kid doing out there in the rain? She picked up her flashlight and went over to the door, opening it and peering out into the darkness, shining the beam all around the area outside of the cabin. "Hello?" she called out. "Hello? Is anybody there?" For a moment she heard nothing but the wind and rain, but there it was again, unmistakably the voice of a small child somewhere in the darkness. "Hello?" she shouted. "Hello?" The voice that answered was muffled. "Help me! Help me!" Jesus, Brenda thought. What could have happened? Maybe it was some little kid from town out there by the lake playing with some friends. Some kid that got separated somehow and then something happened. Maybe he slipped and fell and hurt himself or fell into an old trap or something. She shivered at the picture of a kid with his foot caught in one of those steel-jawed traps. God, he could bleed to death. Where was he? Help me! Help me! Where are you? Where are you? Brenda shouted, moving barefoot down the muddy path, shining her flashlight beam all around her, paying no attention to the wind and rain. A child was out there, in trouble. He sounded hurt. Help me! Help me! The voice was coming from the direction of the playing field out by the archery range. She was certain of it. God, they had left a lot of tools in that storage shed, unlocked. Some little kid, oh God, some little kid could have gone in there and... Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Where are you? She shouted, her eyes straining to penetrate the darkness. She started moving faster. Suddenly, someone threw the switch on the junction box and the quartz halogen spotlights mounted on poles at the edge of the range came on, bathing her in brilliance. She turned and squinted against the glare, backing away, trying to block out the light with her hand over her eyes. She couldn't see if there was someone standing at the edge of the range or not. All right, she shouted angrily. Come on out, it's not funny anymore. She backed away from the bright light, shielding her eyes with her hand, trying to see if anyone was there. Nettie. It had to be Nettie. Damn it, this was just too much. It's not funny at all, she yelled. Now she was sure she could see a figure at the edge of the range, just a backlit shadow. Nettie, she thought, I'm gonna fucking kill you. Then she saw the figure raising something and pulling back. Oh my God, she thought, it was a bow. Has he gone completely crazy? What does he... She heard a soft hiss coming toward her, unbelievably quickly. And in the split second that she realized what it was and screamed, the arrow plunged into her stomach, sending her stumbling back against the archery target behind her. It was followed by another and another and another, the arrows marking dull, wet smacking sounds as they plowed into her flesh. But after the second one, she could no longer feel a thing. They had finished cleaning up, and Alice threw another log onto the fire. Then she walked over to the couch and picked up Bill's guitar. She strummed a couple of chords. There had been a time where she had wanted to learn how to play, but she'd never been able to get past 3 or 4 chords. And you could play a lot of songs with just 3 or 4 chords. And she'd been able to fake it a few times at parties, making people think she really knew how to play. But in the end, she had become frustrated and gave it up. Bill, though, was really good. He didn't just strum it, he finger-picked. He was gentle with it, his fingers seemed to caress the strings. She wondered what those fingers would feel like caressing her. She had watched him earlier that evening, sitting on the couch and absently picking up a chord progression, and later, during dinner, and afterward during the game. He always seemed so laid back, so comfortable. He just seemed to take things in stride, especially now after that game. A lot of guys would have made a pass at her, but here they were alone and Bill hadn't made a single move. It wasn't that he was afraid that Steve might arrive. She didn't think that that was the reason, because they had a clear view from the front window of the dirt road leading into the camp. They would have seen Steve's headlights coming. It just seemed that he wasn't the sort of guy to make moves on a girl. She had given him no encouragement, so he was simply being friendly. She thought he was attracted to her, but he wasn't rushing anything. He was taking the time to get to know her and how she felt about things, especially Steve. Instead of trying to force things, he was willing to kick back and let them happen. Take things as they come, no rush, no hassle. She found that to be a very attractive quality. She was wondering if perhaps she shouldn't encourage him a little when she thought she heard a scream. Bill came in from the back room carrying a kerosene lantern that he'd been filling.
Bill?
She said.
Hi. Just checked on the generator. It's still running okay.
He said, smiling.
I thought I heard a scream.
She said.
I don't know how you could hear anything through that wind.
He was obviously not taking her seriously.
It sounded like Brenda.
He glanced up at her sharply, looking to see if she was pulling his leg. She seemed completely serious.
I'd better take a look.
He said.
Yeah.
Alice stood by the window looking out through the curtains.
And someone turned out the lights at the archery range?
What?
Bill came over to the window.
I can't see anything.
They're off now.
Alice said. He glanced at her and she looked frightened.
I'm going to check it out.
He said, reaching for his slicker.
Bill, can I come?
Come on then.
He had a feeling it was probably one of the others fooling around. Undoubtedly Ned. Only Ned would be goofing off in the middle of a storm, but it couldn't hurt to check. He handed her slicker to her and they went out into the rain. Down the path toward Brenda's cabin, lighting the way with the lamp. They ran up the steps and opened the door.
Brenda?
Alice called.
Brenda!
There was no sign of anyone inside. There was a candle burning on the shelf and her slicker was still hanging on a hook behind the door. Where is she? Alice wondered. She must be with Jack and Marcy, she said to herself as Bill went past her. They were probably out in one of the other cabins smoking dope or something.
Alice?
Bill called.
Yeah?
Come here.
His voice sounded strange. She ran over to where he stood, bending down over Brenda's bed. He pulled back the covers. There was a bloody axe on the pillow. Bill picked it up and turned to look at Alice.
What's going on?
Come on.
Said Bill. They ran out the door, heading toward Jack and Ned's cabin.
Jack!
Shouted Bill. He hammered on the door.
Jack! Open the door!
Where are they?
I don't know. Come on.
They ran down to the latrine cabin. Alice turned on the light as they came through the door.
Brenda? Marcy?
Jack?
Said Bill. There was no response. The bathroom seemed empty.
Nettie?
Alice said. Bill bent down and picked up Marcy's flashlight.
You know,
Alice said uneasily.
I think we should call someone.
If this is a joke, I'm gonna brain him.
I'm serious.
Alice said.
I really think we should call someone.
They ran to the office. It seemed as if they were the only ones left in the entire camp.
Sucker's locked.
Said Bill, pulling on the door and rattling it, kicking at it in frustration.
Where's the key?
I don't know. Wait a minute. Watch out.
With her elbow protected by the rubberized sleeve of the slicker, she smashed one of the glass panes in the door, then reached in and opened the lock from the inside.
Careful.
Said Bill as she pulled her hand out through the broken glass. She opened the door and went inside.
Get the light.
Said Bill. She flicked on the light while he ran for the phone and picked it up. A second later, he slammed the receiver back down.
What's wrong?
It's dead. Try the payphone.
Do you have a quarter?
No, check the desk.
She rummaged around until she found a small metal strongbox containing petty cash in one of the lower drawers. She sighed in relief when she saw it wasn't locked. She took some change and ran back to the phone. She dropped the coins in.
Hello? Hello? Oh, this damn thing's dead too.
Relax.
Said Bill. Alice was starting to get all worked up and there was no reason for it yet. There had to be an explanation. The phones, they were dead because the line was down somewhere. It was the storm. That was the only possible explanation, but it wasn't. One explanation that did not occur to them was that the line might have been cut, in this case chopped with a machete. Alice slammed the phone back on the cradle and ran out of the cabin. Bill took off after her. She sprinted down the hill toward Nettie's pickup truck. She made it to the truck just yards ahead of Bill, threw open the door and leaped inside, only to discover there were no keys in the ignition.
Alice!
Bill said, opening the door.
Damn it! Damn it! No keys! Nettie's got the keys!
Alice, you've got to calm down. There has to be a...
We've got to get out of here!
She screamed, staring at him wildly. Fear was coursing through her. She could feel that something had happened to the others. something she didn't even want to think about.
Hot wire. You said you worked on cars. Can you hot wire a car?
Well, of course I can hotwire a car, but...
Then do it. Do it now, Bill.
Rather than argue with her, he got into the truck, reached underneath the dash, and he yanked down the wires leading to the ignition switch. It only took a few seconds to find the hot lead. He touched the wires together and the starter motor turned over, but the engine would not catch.
Again. Do it again,
said Alice. He tried several more times with the same result, then got out and went to the front of the truck and raised the hood.
What's the matter with it?
It's wet. I don't know,
said Bill. He shrugged. It was nothing glaringly obvious, nothing he could see in the dark with only a flashlight, and he wasn't really looking that hard either, being more concerned with calming Alice. That was why he didn't see the cut wires leading out of the distributor cap. Alice jumped off the truck and ran to him.
Why don't we just hike out of here? Just get out right now.
Look, it's 10 miles to the nearest crossroads. Steve will be back soon. We can use his Jeep to get help. Don't worry. There's probably some stupid explanation for all of this.
Like what?
She said. He put his arm around her and kissed her on the cheek.
It's okay. We'll be laughing about this tomorrow, I promise.
He grabbed the hood of the truck and slammed it shut.
Come on, let's get out of this rain.
Getting out of the rain was just what Steve Christie was thinking about as he sat in the driver's seat of his Jeep about 5 miles from the camp, stuck in the mud. The deer had bottled across the road in front of him, and he had only seen it at the last moment. He had swerved, but the added weight of the load he was towing sent the Jeep slewing around and the trailer jackknifed, nearly flipping over. He barely managed to bring the whole sliding rig under control, but not before he had skidded off to the side of the road and onto the soft shoulder, which the rain had turned into quicksand pretty much. The trailer was stuck fast in a muddy ditch, and even the four-wheel drive wasn't enough to get it out. Perfect, he thought, leaning his head against the steering wheel. For a while it had looked as if things were beginning to go well, and now everything was suddenly going wrong. The rain was probably going to ruin all the painting they had done outside. There was a slight chance that the paint might have dried in time, but Steve wasn't counting on it. On top of that, the cook he'd hired had never shown up. He had run into Dorf in town, and Crystal Lake's answer to Don Knotts was already complaining that the kids he hired were a bunch of smart-ass wise guys. Apparently, he'd taken a ride out there earlier, and they had neglected to salute him. And Alice was ready to give up and go back to California, and now this. Maybe there really was a curse on the goddamn place. Flashing red lights came on behind him, and he glanced into the rearview mirror and sighed with relief as he saw the police car pull off the side of the road. He pulled up the hood of his slicker and got out of the Jeep. The spotlight shone on him, and he squinted against its glare. "Hi, Steve." It was Sergeant Tierney. "Hi," said Steve, relieved that it wasn't Dorf. "I thought that thing would go through anything," said Tierney. "Not riding a trailer," Steve replied wryly. "Can you give me a lift?" "Sure." Tierney opened up the passenger door for him. "I'll have one of my counselors bring me back in the morning," Steve said, getting in. "No problem." Tierney turned off the flashers and pulled back onto the road. "Hell of a night, isn't it there?" "It's a nasty one," Steve agreed. "It's not bad enough that it's Friday the 13th, don't you know?" said Tierney, grimacing. "We got a full moon, too." He snorted. "We keep statistics, you know. We have more accidents, more rapes, more robberies, more homicides, more of everything when there's a full moon. It upsets people, makes them nuts." Steve grinned. "You've made a science out of coincidence." Tierney shrugged. "Can't argue with the numbers. Heard old Ralph was out your way today. His wife was a nervous wreck until we got him home." "Oh boy, that's all I need," said Steve. "Crazy Ralph running around." "Well, at least the rain's slowing down. Piss her while it lasted, though." The radio crackled and the dispatcher's voice came on. "Sergeant Tierney, come in. Sergeant Tierney, code 9er." Tierney grabbed the mic. "Yeah, this is Tierney. Rescue squad with jaws of life," the dispatcher said. "Near mile marker 17, possible fatales. 3, maybe 4 trapped. Head on." "Roger," Tierney said. "Acknowledge receipt. Estimated arrival, 15 minutes. He hung the mic back on its hook. "See what I mean?" he said. He pulled over at the turnoff leading to the camp. I'm gonna have to let you off here, Steve. Sorry, man." "Sure, thanks. Good luck." He got out of the car and Tierney swung around, hitting the lights and the siren. Steve gave him a wave, then started down the road. As he approached the new sign by the entrance, he saw a Jeep parked at the side of the road. Someone was standing beside it, aiming a flashlight at him. He squinted against its glare and shaded his eyes.
"Hello? Who is that?"
He approached the figure, trying to make out who it was.
"Oh, hi,"
he said, smiling with recognition. The knife blade flashed briefly in the light and then plunged deep into his stomach. He felt it as a blow, as if it had been punched hard in the stomach and the wind whistled out of it. His first reaction was utter disbelief, and then he felt the first sharp piercing pain as the knife was withdrawn and then plunged in again. His hands flew up in a futile gesture to protect himself, but his knees were already buckling. The knife flashed down again and again, slashing repeatedly, and as he fell, unable to scream, the full realization of what was happening to him sunk in. In the brief moment before he collapsed, he suddenly knew what had happened to those 2 young counselors back in '58. He knew who had set the fires. He knew who had poisoned the water. He also knew the reason why, but the knowledge came far too late. Far too late. And as he fell, dying, he remembered what Tierney had said about Friday the 13th and the full moon. His last agonized thought was that there was nothing he could do to save those poor kids at the camp. Nothing at all. Okay, Slashaholics, you've just heard an early access upload from the Patreon page. On Patreon, you'll get early access to this book and others to be named in the future, all great slasher novels. All early access titles on Patreon will have weekly chapter uploads that premiere on Patreon 2 to 3 weeks before they make it to YouTube. So, if you want to have early access to Friday the 13th by Simon Hawke, head on over to Patreon. Thank you all so much for listening. Hope you're enjoying this book so far. And as always,
pleasant dreams!